Beautiful, courageous, curious co-creators. Welcome to the Authentic Action Podcast. With me, I'm Gabrielle Angel Lilly, also known as Angel the Artist. And today's episode is brought to you by Sleeping Dragons Company. Awaken your creative spirit with Sleeping Dragons natural aromatherapy perfumes and essential oil blends, as well as many other wonderful things, including art by yours truly. Over on Etsy, you can find us at sleepingdragonsco.com. Without further ado, let's dive into it, shall we? Welcome to the Authentic Action Podcast, where we dive a little deeper into diverse stories about people who have designed and are living lives that they love. I'm your host, Gabrielle Angel Lilly, and I'm super excited about today's guest because we just met. We have spoken very little, and I'm excited to see what he has to offer to you listeners today. He is the founder and CEO of M&A Science and the M&A Science Podcast, the M&A Science Academy more recently, and also the author of a couple books, the Agile M&A, and M&A Tactics. And if you, like me, were wondering, what is M&A stand for? Some of you may be well-versed. I was not, even though I come from a business background out of practice. So let me just clarify, that stands for mergers and acquisitions. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Kison Patel.
Hey, Gabrielle. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me. And let me know if I just butchered your name. And then maybe you can tell us a little bit more about mergers and acquisitions in a better form than I just did.
Oh, I mean, simply, you said it well. I mean, simply put, it's big company buys little company most of the time. Sometimes you get the little company buying the big company.
Yeah.
But, it's usually those are large transactions. They can potentially be some of the largest transactions in the world. Along with it is a lot of complexity. It can result in being some of the largest magnitude of change management an organization can go through. Mm-hmm. That's where a lot of the complexities come from.
Yeah, I think that's where some of our interests merge, is in change management and in higher education, and in where I saw some bridging between what you're doing and what I'm doing that I'm interested in getting into potentially, is in that you are definitely interested in building systems of helping, and you're looking at how do we improve these systems that are merging and involved with big money to both make them more efficient for the monetary side. But what I'm excited about is how do we make sure that we're taking care of this human side, especially as we move forward more and more rapidly, as your book Agile, which I confess I have not read because I only learned about it just now, but I'm interested enough. I probably will read. But just in looking at the summary of, reminds me of blitz scaling and that whole idea of how we're moving faster and faster. You know, you can almost not move fast enough, and yet with technology coming into things, it's more and more important to make sure we set up these systems in a way that takes care of the human side, I feel like. So I see you creating, again, from my very rudimentary understanding, I think that you are developing app and systems that try to maybe add longevity to the back end of these systems so that we can better take care of that aspect. Am I totally off base? Or what are your thoughts on some of that?
We started with the focus on helping with the due diligence process when it came to mergers and acquisitions. And we started by building a technology solution that replaced this approach of using an Excel tracker and what's a virtual data room. And a virtual data room is essentially a Dropbox product with built-in extra security features. You have very granular permission to the individual file. You have watermarking documents that's automated, and an audit trail, so you can track every activity that happens, which is needed when two organizations are sharing sensitive information, employee contracts, customer contracts, trade secrets, and et cetera. And along with having tight NDA agreements and non-disclosure agreements with those. And then through the process of doing diligence, when you're looking to acquire a company, the buyer will have a large series of documents they're going to request to be able to review, and they're looking to validate what's represented is true and accurate. They want to identify risks and at the time plan on how they're going to integrate this organization. What follows that is typically a myriad of clarification questions to really understand and validate some of these things, get those responses. When this is done in Excel, it's really tedious and cumbersome. You're trying to basically have a conversation in an Excel tracker.
Yeah, I can only imagine that.
We started our company replacing that with a project management tool, taking inspiration from the software industry, seeing how these software engineers built great tools and technology to manage developing software, and thought, why not in our industry? So borrowing an idea from another industry in the software space, bringing it to M&A. Over time, it evolved where the adjacent problem was managing the integration, which even gets more complex. So taking some of the same similar functionality we created, expanding on it a bit to handle the nuances when it comes to integration. And it built a nice value proposition for our customers in that we had continuity between all this activity that happens in diligence and transferring this knowledge over to the folks that are executing on the activities for integrating the company, and allowing them to plan earlier in these benefits. And then pipeline management, managing the front end search of the opportunities, became another adjacent area that we built in the product, and it evolved into a full lifecycle management solution. And that's purely from the technology side. One of the things in that journey that we quickly realized was these large corporations all had a unique, distinct way of looking at M&A, and that this underpinning problem in the industry, and that the industry itself was very siloed and lacked standardization or best practices. So we took that opportunity, along with the trend we saw or encouragement of a friend in marketing, to go start a podcast, and launched a podcast as a platform to use and enable practitioners to share lessons learned, so we can in turn identify patterns, identify where there are proven techniques from practitioners with these vast amount of experience. And the reason why that's important, M&A is different. It's not like a lot of other fintech segments when we think of crypto and all these other things that are trending. It's not based on sophisticated engineering, highly quantitative data sets, and analyzing it, running AI algorithms. No, it's very much the opposite. It's people-to-people issues. At the end of the day, there's a vision for doing this deal. There's goals that need to be achieved, and it's about aligning people to stay focused on the priorities to be able to achieve those goals and work together.
Right.
And that's where, going through these interviews, we're identifying what are some of those practical approaches and techniques that can enable that level of collaboration and teamwork that needs to happen and manage the change to produce those results. So from that, we've evolved that podcast series into a full digital media business where we published over 350 blogs and ebooks today. We have 2 published books. Our Agile M&A you mentioned earlier is based on case studies with Google and Atlassian, specifically how they utilize Agile techniques stemming from the engineering culture and applied it to M&A with great success. Seeing that as a trend that is forthcoming in the industry, we designed that book to be a framework to help other organizations adopt those techniques. And then we started an online school last year to help practitioners get access to practical how-tos from other active practitioners in the industry. So that's where today we look at the practice as a combination of introducing best practices and technology hand in hand, In fact, we take a lot of the inspiration for the functionality we create in the software from what we're learning on the education side. When we see a trend happening, for example, using OKRs to define the goals of integration and keep the teams aligned as they move through that process, we're now building that into the software to support that type of management approach. So it's really come together where we've built two distinctive lines with education and technology, but now we're really bringing them together in various service offerings.
Yeah. I get excited because I'm a, like a web thinker. So I see a lot of areas coming together under this desire for us to build new systems that are more of, keeping in line and keeping up with the technology that we're designing. So if you don't mind, I'd love to sort of interject a little pause there for some potential listeners about how a young or an old person, a person looking to navigate into not just using the app, the DealRoom and the stuff that you're involved in creating, but becoming part of helping to develop those types of new systems. Maybe, I don't know if that question was very clear, but that might have more to do with how you got where you are, or it might have to do with what you're looking for in people to collaborate with as you move forward to develop these systems.
I think it boils down to problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
I think the entrepreneur dilemma is you tend to have an idea that's based off of either personal experience or something you noticed. And from that idea, you expand on it. And a lot of those things, without realizing it, are based on assumptions. And your job as an entrepreneur is to really validate those assumptions that every product business is fundamentally solves a problem.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times we want to rush to take a solution, take it out to market, and do the fun part of a business, produce revenue. But you got to really start with an unbiased approach to validate the problem that you're looking to solve. And I think and for us, we learned it the hard way. When we went to market with a product based on assumptions, it failed, and we went back to the drawing board and said, wait a minute, let's really, really understand what we're trying to solve here. Let's in fact go to these different cohorts of customers or potential customers and spend the time to understand and do this in a very unbiased way where you can have a conversation and say, hey, what are the biggest problems that you face today? And dig into it and really understand without leading them to your solution or where you're thinking of the problems you're solving. In doing that, we realized that there's bigger problems, there's bigger fish to fry for our customer than what we originally had in mind. And in doing that, you get to understand the problem from the person that really deals with it firsthand. You understand how they articulate and speak about the problem. You understand the weight or the severity of the problem. What's it worth to them? Are they actually going to compensate well to solve that problem?
Mm-hmm.
And then that you lead that into a cycle where you continue that feedback as you produce a solution. And you may start with just simple sketches to mock-ups. And it's good to have that feedback at those stages early in developing a solution. It's relatively inexpensive to make changes when you're editing some sketches or mocks.
Mm-hmm.
As you produce and go further down, it gets relatively more expensive, the more mature and more closer you are to finished product to make changes. So it's important to get that feedback and bring those prospective customers and part of that journey. If you do it right, you actually line up some customers, you validate not only the problem you're solving, but the solution you're developing in this continuous approach. I think that's important, and it applies in a lot of different areas. Even if you're working in an organization and you're looking to solve problems, can you bring in the stakeholders? Can you take this approach to understand the problem first in a more of a scientific or unbiased way, document your findings, because when you do a series of those interviews, you'll start finding patterns. And then from there, you'll validate if the problems we're solving, or may identify a new problem we're solving, and then go through the process of iterating to come with a solution. And then in that latter part, you'll need to validate what your go-to-market looks like. How are you going to actually distribute that solution? Another really important thing, you can't just look at the market and copy what you see or seems obvious. I think it's very unique to your solution, and you need to get that similar feedback from those prospective cohorts of customers to understand that, how they're going to find their solution and purchase it.
So help me understand, clarify a little, if you would, is the academy and podcast, I presume, kind of working together to help you develop those ideas to then put into, I don't know if specifically DealRoom, the app, or if you're working on other ways to bring those ideas, into a workable way into.
Sometimes if it's just purely a practice approach, you might not need a software. Sometimes these things are done well in Excel if it makes sense to have a simple template on there. Sometimes there are financial models and things of that approach which probably belong in Excel.
Yeah.
But then there's certain practices where it may make sense to utilize a product or a feature set to standardize. In that case, then we look at it and say, hey, is there a way to develop software to help standardize it? Does that make it more efficient? Is it worth doing it? And that's where we have a product that starts with a simple solution. You start somewhere, and where we solve for this diligence process. Now it's evolved into a platform where we continue to develop functionality as we identify problems to solve. But then we build capability for our users to be able to customize or integrate with other tools and build a unique tech stack that is tailored for their specific needs. So that there's, they're solving sort of a broader sense of problems, but then even getting specific and taking a tailored approach for the customers that we would work with. And I think that's just a big part of maturity. I think it depends where you're at. Early stage, you just want to find one problem, solve it well for one specific type of customers, and be able to repeat and solve it for multiple of those types of customers. And then as you grow and mature, you'll identify other problems to solve for that set of customers.
Yeah. So I'm interested in, and I don't want to get too personal if you don't want to, but I am interested in personal stories of how you, because it seems to me that you have a fairly unique, set of parameters I'm interested in how you got from the beginnings of your life to talking to me here on the Authentic Action podcast, and involved, in the last, has it been 10 to 20 years in mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know how far you want to go back, but I was actually born in Chicago. I grew up in small town Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
And, our kind of early years over there, I started my undergrad program in Nebraska. It was struggling. I've always struggled with having a short attention span.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just being active or hyper, I always wanted to keep my hands in something. But I think college, it was struggled a lot more than high school. High school, everything was based on a textbook. You memorize the bold words and their definitions. And if I had to read it twice, I did, and I passed, and it wasn't a big deal. But when it came to college and things were more lecture-based, I struggled. And I transferred to Illinois, ended up failing out of undergrad. And that's where it sort of was a big event for me to figure out where to go. I remember working for an uncle who was running he probably had about a dozen of these various franchise restaurants, and the majority of them were Subway franchises. So I went to work for him for about a year, and just probably one of the most difficult things you can do in your life is work for a family member. where you really get the treatment. And, I remember it gave me such a hard time where he just had me wash dishes every day and not giving me enough hours that I needed to pay bills. But I learned work ethic, I think, at the end of the day, where I've always been the person that looked for shortcuts and things. So I did it. I learned to roll the sleeves, and something in the mindset just changed or clicked one day that, hey, let me prove them I can do. Let me prove them wrong, that they're, I don't know if they're trying to break me, but let me prove them wrong. And I started coming in with this 120% effort attitude. And that allowed me to really progress, that, hey, I'm handling this task. Okay, let me give them the next task, give them the next task. And by the end of the year, I was managing 2 stores for them. But at that time, I had aspirations because I wanted to set out to prove something. I said, this kind of had my bottom years. I want to strike back and do something meaningful. I was determined to be a millionaire. I remember that around 21 years old, I said that most of the problems I have are associated with not having the income I want. So I want to be a millionaire. I thought it was acceptable for somebody that didn't finish college to get a real estate license and practice real estate to achieve that goal. So I got my real estate license, and I remember getting a job at one of the residential companies, Baird and Warner real estate firms, and was excited about it. And they give you a desk, a phone, and I think they literally give you a phone book back then.
I remember those briefly, vaguely.
I struggled. I was terrible at selling houses. I couldn't make the connection to really be successful at it. I felt clients didn't want to buy from a young kid in his early 20s. I was still working part-time at Subway just to make ends meet while living at my parents' house. And, I wasn't interested. The houses were nice, but I was always interested in businesses. I liked businesses, the way they operate, the financials. I was fortunate. I found in a firm with about 90 brokers, one gentleman that was selling commercial real estate, and was able to have the conversations and get the encouragement to go venture out and find a company that was an early startup that was building an M&A advisory practice, selling mainly small privately held companies, to get my foot in the door, and really got an opportunity to work on those transactions, work directly with clients, review financials, build a narrative on the opportunity to create value in a business to acquire, and did well. The first year, I sold a handful of businesses. I wasn't sold on the company itself that I worked for. I wasn't confident they had a strong future. I didn't think their strategy or approach was strong enough. They weren't very focused. So I decided to move on my own after a year, and still in my early 20s, leased a small office in downtown Chicago, built a consulting practice, doing buy-side, sell-side advisory. I think I did gas stations for a year and a half, which increased my size from these tiny little business I was selling to something more substantial. And then got into selling hotels or hospitality. Started again small, then grew up into doing corporate work for Kimpton, Extended Stay America, La Quinta. And then it was really had an opportunity to work on a deal that was a small financial institution for sale, which really got me excited. It was just something new. It was something challenging. And I worked in that industry for about 2.5 years, advising community banks on capital raising, buying and selling. And then the recession happened, which allowed me to digress and sort of reflect on the experience I had, where I became more interested in the technology side. I got involved with a tech startup that didn't necessarily pan out, but it allowed me to get in the industry, get a lot of exposure to how software engineers were using these project management tools, and gave me a lot of inspiration there to revisit our industry with an idea to bring to start DealRoom in 2012. So that's a little bit of the background of,
That's a great synopsis. Thank you. That took me on a nice quick journey. I notice a theme that I hear a lot, which is your personal struggle to find, to pushing back against feeling pushed down and then finding that thing that made you feel successful with your specific skill set, which I'm hearing a lot of ADHD type of terminology lately, which part of me says is just a buzzword, but I do think there's an interesting correlation between today's leaders that I listen to and follow and sometimes get to speak to, and this tendency to be fast moving and fast thinking and not really want to get need help with that management piece, which I think is really neat that's what you're building as a result of that challenge, basically. So
you got to play off your strengths and understand your weaknesses.
yeah. I think I went to business school like 20 years ago, and they often talk about, and education school, and they talk about developing your strengths. But I think the current rhetoric is hire somebody else to fill in for your weaknesses and develop your strengths, which it sounds like you kind of got to early. So that's great. Tell me more about what you're promoting today as far as the Academy, your books, your app. What would you like to bring our listeners' attention to the most as we move forward into the future? I have some more questions about your thoughts on the future, but let's start there.
Our core business is very corporate M&A. We primarily work with billion-plus market cap companies to help them solve complex M&A problems. But we're advocates of the industry. I think what we've developed is a community of practitioners that care about it, that are passionate about it. And I think the general population a lot of times aren't familiar with M&A. They see the headline news, but they really don't understand what goes behind the scene, or this myriad of careers that go far beyond investment banking that participate in these M&A transactions. And I think for us is getting more exposure to some of those career opportunities in the industry. We last year launched a diversity scholarship to help introduce career paths in M&A for people of people of diverse backgrounds that are underrepresented in the industry. So we're big advocates on that. We give access to our Academy programs to help them get the training, get the opportunities, participate in the networking. So I think that's probably one of our broader goals, is to really bring good exposure to the industry and the career paths that aren't often in the public exposure.
Yeah, that's one of my personal passions, is what used to be called at-risk youth when I was one of those. But I see this growing divide between people who have, people who deal with money and people who perceive money as this thing that they think they should have more of, but they don't know how to. And as a entrepreneur myself of various degrees and success, I know that it comes from mostly mindset, first of all, and then like who you are associating with and what you're thinking about. And so I'm interested in introducing why I ask you more about your human story, because I think sometimes we end up on one side or the other. And what I see happening right now is a need to bring that human story into the conversation in a more systematic way, sort of, as we move forward into apps and technology of ways that we're dealing with faster and bigger things going on in the business world. And I think to keep in mind that it's all about bringing us on the individual human level good quality of life, and good, like to continue to bring it back to that. I studied business culture a lot, so I'm aware of how mergers often leave that piece out of it if you focus just on the number part. And I'm fascinated and haven't really looked into in the last 10 or 20 years how that's being kept up with. But it seems to me that you are someone who is keeping up with that more. So I'm fascinated to know how you're doing that and how you see that being done as we move forward.
People connect with people.
Yeah.
We just see a broader trend in our industry of having this finance focus when they approach M&A to more of a people focus.
Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, DealRoom is a place where it's more, you've taken a little of the Excel sheet out of it and put more people to people in the business to business transaction aspect of it, or am I off track there?
We look at it as a collaboration product. That the goal of it is to enable better collaboration across the various teams that are involved in those transactions.
Yeah. And then are you putting things in place that are, you talked about due diligence, or you mentioned, and I'm wondering, does that mean that there's an ongoing element that lasts a little longer than it used to, or is it more about summing it up even quicker and getting all that taken care of?
I think usually the people in the front end of the deal that go find the opportunity, negotiate it, typically they close the deal and hand it off to another team to integrate the company. Now there's a good realization that that doesn't work. You need to create continuity between those teams and have a strong partnership. So we're seeing more accountability on those folks that lead the charge in the front end of the actual results from post-close. So, and that's really helping teams rethink their approach in general. That for them to produce the results, they need to create a better people experience for all the stakeholders involved, the customers, the employees, the vendors. Each organization respectively is in existence to create value for their customers. So when those organizations come together, what does that look like? How are they going to be working together to create more value or better experience for their customers? That's becoming more front and center. This vision of what end state we're trying to achieve is now being pulled up to the front end of the process so that leadership can think through the steps that are going to be needed, the go-to-market outline to be able to realize that end state, and putting a lot more emphasis on the planning that needs to happen to make sure that both organizations are aligned to come together with a common goal of creating this enhanced customer experience and delivering the additional value for the customers.
That's a good place to segue into a question that I like to ask, which I like to call the 3 wishes question, which is, I like to try to ask it in different ways to keep myself on my toes. So off the cuff, I'm going to say, if you had 3 wishes with just no, a magic golden goose laid some eggs with no parameters, and one was immediate and one was going to hatch in in a year, and one was going to hatch in 5 years, what would your wish be for best outcome of what you're working on now? As far as again, right now, what would your wish be? What would your wish be with no logical parameters? Just if anything could be, what would you wish for the outcome of what you're working on?
I think it's just starting with the people, getting the right people in the organization, getting people where we're aligned on the way of working, that we can strive for a common goal. I think that would be the first thing to really have provided or structured. And then I think the midterm, it's I guess solidifying that way of working culturally with alignment. My approach has always been focusing on leadership, continuous learning, and empathy. So just having this sort of the organization centered in around the common values, and really acting in that way, and I think long term is the results of that was going to be the impact that we can make in an industry. We set out to make a change. It wasn't a specific monetary goal that we're striving for. but that we knew we're working in an industry that's highly antiquated, had a massive opportunity to make an impact, to change the way these large transactions are completed, that would in turn have an impact on the organizations and the people involved, so that people can have a better experience. It wasn't as destructive when things are inefficient and not communicated well, that we can create a much better people experience that ends up with better value created and a better experience for the employees to continue their roles and grow in the organizations. And I think that's yet to be realized. So that's probably the long goal, is to, see that impact made in the industry.
Yeah. Do you have a metric that you are using for that? Like, how will you know if you succeed at that goal?
I think it's one of those things where you'll know from the customers. The customers are really there advocating that here's a whole new way, and they've seen the result. And I think we're getting better at it. We started with solving incremental problems, and now they're coming together and really bringing changes in the industry, but it's getting compiling. And now we're taking the combination of the practices, the technology, and building a community around it that's advocating for this kind of change. I think it'll definitely come from the people that are adopting a way, that are really moving from an old, traditional approach into something built around agility. And it's clear from the customer. And I think getting some acknowledgement when they do see that change and the results and benefits from it. But it's really this customers, the stories that they tell on the end results that they've been able to achieve.
Yeah, I love that. I think we're on the same team from far away, building systems of helping for people, I like to call it. So thank you for sharing some of your story. Is there more that you would like to, as far like, where would you like to direct people with regards to what you are working on?
Yeah, if anybody's interested in just learning about M&A in general, or some of our specific work that we do, mascience.com. We have tons of content published for entry-level, mid-level, senior-level practitioners. But yeah, we're always just looking to learn and enjoy being a platform to help others learn about M&A.
Cool. Thank you. I will be checking out the M&A podcast because, again, I just learned about it, but I'm excited to learn more. And I will be putting some links in the descriptions and that sort of thing. So if anybody needs to know more, thank you. Kison, am I saying your name right, or do you want to say it for us?
No, Kison.
All right. Thank you for joining me today. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
Hey, Gabrielle, I appreciate the conversation. It's problem solving. At the end of the day, it's all about listening. I think if anything that I've learned from this years, despite the struggles with attention spans and whatnot, that's why I got a notebook and pen in front of me almost every call and meeting, is to really, really put yourself in an area that you can intently listen. And a lot of times we enter meetings with our own agendas and what we want to get out of it. But if you can spend the time to listen and understand what the other person's goals and challenges are, and align yourself to help them achieve those goals, solve those problems, it'll get you a lot further than pushing your own agenda. So I think listening is just one of the most valuable skills that is important to keep on top of mind. Even when you think you know more than the other person about the subject, you got to get yourself in a state of mind where you can assume what you know is wrong or know nothing, and allow yourself to intently listen.
That's beautiful advice. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to try to be quiet more and just soak that in. That's, it's very valuable advice. Thank you again, Kison, for joining me on the Authentic Action podcast. And again, I will be putting some links to M&A. Is it mascience.com? Say it again.
Yeah, just mascience.com.
All right, mascience.com. Thank you. And don't forget to check out the Authentic Action podcast sponsors. That's sleepingdragonscompany.com or sleepingdragonsco.com. Thanks again for joining us. and stay free.